Can a simple lunch outing shake an entire restaurant to its core? A quiet veteran and his loyal service dog walk in. No fuss, no demands, just a man seeking a peaceful meal. Minutes later, they're shown the door, dismissed like they no longer matter. But this isn't a story of silent defeat, because exactly 2 hours later, 5 Marines in full dress blues walk through that same door, and the room falls utterly silent. Why did they come? What did they know that no one else did? And how did their presence turn one moment of rejection into a powerful message heard far beyond the restaurant walls? This isn't just a story. It's a quiet rebellion wrapped in loyalty, honor, and a bond that never breaks. Let's begin. Daniel Carson walked with the quiet dignity of a man who had survived more than he ever spoke of. At 62, the retired Marine moved with a subtle limp, the kind that came not just from shrapnel, but from carrying too many ghosts. His silver hair was clipped in strict military fashion, and his gaze, deep set and still sharp, seemed to search constantly for threats long past. He had the kind of presence that didn't demand attention, but commanded it anyway. Always by his side was Rocky, a Belgian Malinois with eyes that mirrored Daniel's, alert, intelligent, and a little world-weary. His once dark muzzle had begun to gray, but the vest strapped to his body was clean, purposeful, and unmistakable. Service dog, do not distract. Yet that title barely scratched the surface of what Rocky truly was. To Daniel, he was not just a support animal, he was memory made flesh. He was loyal, given form. Rocky had been trained for elite combat support, sharp, silent, unwavering, but more than his training, what made him indispensable was the way he sensed Daniel's fractures before they showed. The dog could detect the shift in breathing, the slight tremor in his handler's fingers, the quiet storm building behind a calm face. At the first sign, Rocky would press gently against Daniel's leg, grounding him with touch alone. That simple contact had averted countless episodes and saved him from spirals of panic that once would have left him trembling on cold floors. Their bond had been forged far from American sidewalks. In the heat and blood of Kandahar, it was Rocky who had dragged Daniel from the burning wreckage of a convoy, refusing to retreat even as the flames licked closer. Daniel's last conscious memory from that day was the fierce growl of his dog pushing back the dark. They both came home injured. Daniel with a damaged leg, Rocky with shrapnel near his ribs, but they came home together in the years since they had become a unit of their own. They shared a medication schedule, nightmares, and an unspoken language. Daniel no longer needed an alarm. Rocky would nudge him awake when the night terrors arrived. And every morning, like a ritual, Daniel poured himself a cup of black coffee, gave Rocky his pain pill, and sat beside him on the front porch. They'd watch the world wake up in silence, not because they had nothing to say, but because nothing needed to be said. That kind of bond doesn't begin in a kennel, and it doesn't end with retirement. It lives in scars and memory and shared survival. Rocky wasn't just helping Daniel through life. He was the reason Daniel had one to live. It was just a Tuesday, ordinary by all outward measures, the kind of day most people forget by dinner. But for Daniel and Rocky, it was a chance at normalcy. Daniel had heard good things about a place called the Blue Water Grill, known for its seafood and quiet atmosphere. He thought maybe, just maybe, he and Rocky could enjoy a peaceful meal in a corner booth, far from the noise and eyes of crowded spaces. He pushed open the restaurant door slowly, scanning the room. Rocky followed in perfect formation, steps measured and posture alert. As always, they moved as one. The hostess smiled as she greeted them and led them to a corner table near the window. Daniel sat with his back to the wall, a habit he never shook, and Rocky settled silently beneath the table, positioning himself between Daniel's boots. He was practically invisible, a shadow under the table, his ears just brushing the wood above. A young waitress brought over water and a menu with a bright professional smile, but her expression faltered the moment she spotted Rocky. Her gaze lingered, and without a word, she turned and disappeared toward the back of the restaurant. Daniel didn't flinch. He knew the signs. He had seen this scene play out before. Moments later, a man in his 30s approached, a plastic name tag clipped to his chest. Manager! He stopped at the edge of the table, arms folded tightly across his chest, a voice loud enough to make nearby diners look up from their plates. Sir, he said, we have a strict no pets policy here. Daniel looked up slowly. His voice was calm but carried weight. He's not a pet. He's a certified service dog. He reached into his jacket, producing the official identification, worn from years of use. The manager waved it away without even glancing. Rules are rules, he said stiffly. We have health codes to maintain. Some of our guests may not feel comfortable eating near a dog. From 2 tables over, a woman in oversized sunglasses chimed in with a snide comment. Exactly. A dog's a dog, military or not. Daniel heard it but didn't react. Not outwardly, but his jaw clenched ever so slightly. His hand drifted under the table, resting on Rocky's back. The dog didn't move, didn't growl. Trained for combat. Daniel exhaled through his nose. This dog pulled me from burning metal and lay across my body under enemy fire, he said, his voice low but steady. He's the reason I'm here. The manager's stance didn't budge. Then you know what you have to do. Daniel stood slowly. His dignity was unshaken, even as humiliation wrapped around him like a cold wind. Rocky rose beside him in seamless coordination. Together, without a word, they walked out of the restaurant, under the watchful eyes of diners who said nothing, but somehow said everything. The street outside the Blue Water Grill was quieter than usual, but the silence felt heavy. Daniel crossed it without a word, Rocky at his side, their rhythm unbroken. He found a bench near the edge of a small city park, far from the noise of the lunch crowd, and sat down with a stiff exhale. His leg throbbed from walking, but that wasn't what wore him down. It was the weight of being dismissed, not just from a restaurant, but from the world he'd once defended. From the inner pocket of his jacket, Daniel pulled out a sandwich he'd picked up earlier that morning. Tuna on whole wheat, simple, reliable. He unwrapped it slowly, tore it in half, and handed a piece to Rocky. Not quite what I promised you, buddy, he muttered, but it'll have to do. Rocky took the offering gently, careful not to graze Daniel's fingers with his teeth. He chewed with quiet restraint, eyes occasionally glancing up at his handler's face, waiting for cues that never needed speaking. Daniel smiled faintly. That was the thing about Rocky. He never needed words. He just needed to be close. After a moment, Daniel reached into his wallet and pulled out a small, clear plastic sleeve. Inside was a photograph, faded from sun and memory. A younger Daniel, bloodied and half-conscious, lay on a stretcher. Beside him stood Rocky, younger, leaner, his fur darker, but his posture unmistakable, alert, protective, unwavering. His coat was stained with ash and, most likely, Daniel's blood. Around his neck, the tags of Bravo Unit K-9 Division clinked faintly. That photo wasn't a souvenir. It was proof. Proof of survival, of loyalty, of something that didn't fade just because society did. He stared at it for a long time, longer than he meant to, until the quiet was broken by the sound of laughter. A group of college students walked by on the sidewalk. One of them pulled out a phone and began recording. Yo, check it out. The old guy thinks his emotional support pet is some kind of special forces hero, one sneered. Another snorted, my cousin's got an anxiety hamster. Maybe we should get it a little camo vest, too. Daniel heard them, every word, but he didn't flinch. His jaw tightened, his fingers curled against the photo, then slid it carefully back into his wallet. Rocky didn't react either. Not because he didn't hear, but because he'd been trained not to respond to ignorance. Across the street, diners at the Blue Water Grill had returned to their meals, unaware or uninterested that a quiet battle was still being fought just yards away. Daniel looked down at Rocky and whispered, "Kicked out again, aren't we?" The dog responded by resting his head gently on Daniel's knee, the same gesture he had made on a blood-soaked battlefield, and again in hospital rooms, and now on a park bench in a country that sometimes forgot what freedom cost. Back inside the Blue Water Grill, the lunch crowd had begun to thin. Plates clinked, conversations resumed in a comfortable rhythm, and the incident from earlier was already fading into the background noise, just another awkward moment, politely forgotten by those who witnessed it. Then the front doors opened with a sharp chime. 5 men stepped inside, wearing dress blue uniforms that demanded attention without asking for it. Their boots struck the tile in near-perfect sync, their posture straight back, movements economical and purposeful. They didn't glance around for a table. They didn't study the special board. They moved with intent, precision carved into every stride. The room fell quiet, as if the air itself stood still. A child near the window pointed with wide eyes. A businessman lowered his phone mid-sentence. Even the clink of silverware seemed to hesitate. At the front stood a Marine captain, the name McMillan stitched crisply across his chest. He approached the host stand and removed a military ID from the inside pocket of his jacket, placing it squarely on the counter. "I'm Captain James McMillan," he said, voice calm but clear enough to carry through the entire restaurant. "Commanding Officer, Bravo Unit, 1st Marine Special Operations Battalion." The manager emerged from the back, face pale, eyes flicking between the uniforms and the dozens of phones that had suddenly appeared in silent hands. He recognized what was happening too late. "They left," he stammered. "Earlier, a couple of hours ago." Captain McMillan didn't move. "Mr. Daniel Carson saved 4 Marines under my command during an ambush outside Kandahar. His service dog, Rocky, has more confirmed saves than some medics I've served with. He holds the rank of sergeant in our unit's records. He has been awarded the Navy and Marine Corps Medal." The weight of those words landed like a gavel. Nobody moved. The woman in designer sunglasses stared into her water glass, cheeks flushed red. A server froze mid-step, a pitcher of tea suspended in midair. One of the Marines stepped forward, phone in hand. "We're issuing an internal notice to our veteran support network statewide. That's about 15,000 members. They deserve to know how veterans are treated here." The manager raised his hands. "Please, there's been a misunderstanding. We didn't know." "That's exactly the problem," Captain McMillan said, voice still steady. "You shouldn't need to know someone's service record to treat them with basic human dignity. No shouting, no threats, just truth, delivered with quiet conviction." Then Captain McMillan reached into a side pouch and removed a framed photograph. He placed it gently on the counter, Rocky in full tactical gear, posed beside his unit, the word "brother" etched in bold letters across the bottom. Without another word, the 5 Marines turned and walked out, their formation as tight as when they had entered. From the window, diners could now see an old pickup truck parked across the street. Inside, Daniel and Rocky sat quietly, unaware of what was unfolding just a few yards away. Back in the quiet of the truck, Daniel sat motionless behind the wheel, Rocky curled at his side. The half-eaten sandwich wrapper rested in his lap, forgotten. He had seen worse days, far worse. But there was something about being dismissed in silence that carried a weight even gunfire hadn't matched. A slow erosion of worth, not as a soldier, as a man. Across the street, the restaurant bustled again, though now the windows were lined with faces. Diners who had watched 5 Marines walk in and walk out with something unspoken written across their faces. Guilt, maybe, or reverence, or simply recognition of something they hadn't fully understood until it stood in front of them wearing dress blues. The door to the restaurant swung open again. This time, it wasn't a soldier. It was the young waitress from earlier, the one who had smiled before faltering. She moved quickly, clutching a small white takeout box tied with string. Tucked beneath the string was a folded napkin, handwritten words barely visible from a distance. She crossed the street, steps hesitant but determined. Reaching the truck, she held out the package, not saying anything at first. Daniel rolled down the window slowly. We were wrong," she said softly. "Please, let us make it right." Daniel looked at her, then at the box. Inside, the scent of warm food. Crab cakes, probably, and a slice of pie. An apology wrapped in butter and kindness. He took it without ceremony, just a small nod. Not acceptance, not forgiveness, just the quiet acknowledgement that someone had tried. As she turned to leave, she heard him speak, not to her but to the dog beside him. "What do you think, buddy?" Daniel murmured. "Should we give them another chance?" Rocky's tail wagged once, a single beat like a soldier's silent agreement to a ceasefire. A week later, the Blue Water Grill looked different. In its front window, right where the daily specials used to be displayed, now hung a new sign, bordered in navy, blue, and gold. "We proudly welcome all veterans and their service companions." Beneath it, a framed photograph showed military working dogs from World War II to modern-day Afghanistan, standing tall beside their human counterparts, eyes forward, ready. It hadn't happened overnight, but something had shifted. The local veterans organization held a quiet ceremony outside the restaurant that morning. No speeches, no parades, just presence. Daniel was there, of course, with Rocky at his side. And this time, they weren't turned away, they were greeted. Children from a nearby elementary school had made thank you cards, crayon-drawn flags, handprints in red and blue, notes that said things like "thank you for being brave" and "dogs are heroes too." One small boy approached slowly, his hand tightly clutching a folded piece of paper. He looked up at Daniel with wide, unsure eyes, then pointed to Rocky. "Does he understand when people say thank you?" he asked, voice barely above a whisper. Daniel, stiff-legged but steady, knelt beside the boy. Rocky sat patiently, tongue tucked behind his teeth, his tail gently brushing the ground. "He doesn't need words," Daniel said softly. "He just needs to be near the people who remember what he's done." Then came the medal. A simple circular medallion on a red, white, and blue ribbon was pressed into Daniel's hand by the head of the Veterans Council. Engraved on it were 5 words: "Four-legged warrior, above and beyond." Daniel clipped it gently to Rocky's vest. The dog didn't break posture, not even a blink. Only when Daniel gave a soft release command did Rocky rise and wag his tail just once. Not out of excitement, out of understanding. For the first time in a long while, they weren't just seen. They were remembered. The corner table at the Blue Water Grill had changed. It was no longer just a spot near the window. It now bore a small American flag tucked into a metal holder, and beside it, a modest brass plaque. "Daniel and Rocky Bravo team, never forgotten." They came in every Thursday. No reservation, no need. The staff knew to keep it open. Daniel never asked for special treatment. He ordered the same dish most times, blackened salmon, light on the seasoning, and always split a piece of cornbread with Rocky. The dog would lie beneath the table, still as ever, only his eyes moving, scanning, always alert but never alarmed. One evening, as the golden hour light poured through the windows, a familiar face approached their table. It was one of the college students, the one who had recorded the original confrontation with his phone. But this time, he wasn't filming. He stood there awkwardly, phone in his hand but facing down. "I deleted the video," he said quietly. "Didn't feel right after everything. My brother just enlisted last month, and I guess I wanted to say that..." He stopped, words catching in his throat. Daniel looked up and studied him for a long moment. Then, without judgment or scorn, he extended his hand. "Then be the kind of man you'd want someone to be for your brother." The young man nodded, not in apology, in understanding. "I'm past. Seasons shifted. Rocky, though still sharp, moved slower now. His muzzle was more white than gray, but he never missed a cue. Even when a car backfired outside the restaurant one afternoon and Daniel's hands began to tremble, Rocky was already moving, pressing close, anchoring him like he'd done in the field, in hospitals, in silence. Other diners noticed, but no one stared, no one whispered. They simply gave Daniel and Rocky the space they needed, not out of discomfort, but out of earned respect. Captain McMillan's unit deployed again 3 months later. Before leaving, they returned to the restaurant for one last meal with Daniel. That evening, he was presented with a challenge coin from the Bravo unit, an honor rarely given to non-active personnel. Daniel slipped it into his wallet, next to the worn photo of Rocky standing vigil over his injured body. 2 relics, side by side, proof of brotherhood, of bonds forged under fire. And on quiet nights, when the world moved a little slower, you could still find them. Daniel and Rocky sitting on a worn porch just outside the city, watching the sunset without a word, because some memories live best in silence. Not every uniform makes a hero, but anyone who stands by their comrade, man or dog, will never be forgotten.